speaking of, contracts and and the like, Rick Hoeg from Hoeg Law is here. And Rick, how much of everybody's looking at these statements that Ohio State releases and Urban Meyer and the whole thing. How much of this is Urban Meyer trying to win the PR battle? How much of this is Urban Meyer trying to win the legal battle?
Well, I'm not sure that there is in particular a legal battle at this moment in time. You've certainly got a contract that he signed up to, and definitely folks on both ends looking at whether or not they can fire him for cause or not. That has fairly typical language in it for acts of dishonesty being a cause, and things of that nature. So if Ohio State really wanted to press it, just the fact that he basically says he's claiming that he misspoke last week, but it's whether or not you want to characterize it as misspeaking or a lie, it's certainly an act of dishonesty that brought, I think the language is ill repute or something like that, to the university. So if they wanted to make that move, chances are none of this battling really makes that much difference, except for the fact that when you're talking about the millions and millions of dollars that we're talking about, you're basically inviting a lawsuit. And Ohio State knows that because there's just too much money. So lawyers are expensive, an expensive commodity for most litigation. But when you get into the stratosphere for damages, it's essentially a cost of doing business. And you go after it whether or not you've got a good claim. And if you're Urban Meyer, maybe even in just the intent to get a settlement. So he goes out there with a statement at past the 4 p.m. hour on Friday, which I think is a part of the story, in all honesty. And we talked about it a little bit on Twitter, but I put out a blog post about an hour after his statement went out that basically just analyzed it from a lawyer's point of view. So I go sentence by sentence through that statement and say, here's what he's trying to achieve. Here's why this sentence is here. Here's what he's doing. But part of that story is certainly that he waited until what we traditionally think of as the end of or the lack of a news cycle after the bulk of the work week to put out a statement late on a Friday. One, because that's a good time to put out something that you don't really want scrutinized that much. But two, because during the afternoon of that day, we were finding out that Kurt Smith was going to comment on various Zach Smith, was going to comment on various radio programs, and I think he was on SportsCenter on Friday evening. So I think part of the reason for getting that statement out was to get in front of that. But as I say in that post, the question that I have, and I continue to have, and you can read it however cynically you want to read it, depending on how you look at this, is whether or not he's acting in concert with Ohio State at this point in time, or whether he's acting at cross purposes to Ohio State. And I don't think we can know that for certain, although we certainly will pretty shortly, depending on what Ohio State does.
Hoeg Law, in fact, if you'd like to read Richard's post, you can go to Hoeg Law, or at Hoeg Law on Twitter, HOEGLAW.
Yep.
And I just retweeted it a little bit ago, too, about an hour ago. You can read his blog post all about that. Let me ask you this question, Rick, because I've thought about this a little bit. If this situation is unfolding at the University of Michigan, put your lawyer hat on and put your fan hat on and tell me what you would do in both situations.
Well, when you ask this type of question, it's always how hypocritical are you and how
well, exactly.
And how much
I have to say this, it's a lot easier to sit here as a Michigan fan and condemn what's happened at Michigan State and what's happened at Ohio State and say, how can they not take responsibility for this? And we would be different. You don't know you're different until you're in that position.
Well, I am, for one, as kind of a starting point for that, I'm very happy that we're not dealing with this, with Bayline and Harbaugh, and I feel very confident that we won't be in the near future. That said, I also feel confident that in this exact same set of circumstances, I would be advocating for, at the very least, an intense investigation. It's one of those things where looking good, being a university of high virtue and being worthwhile to be a fan of is at some level more important to me than winning, which, is anathema, I know, to sports talk radio.
State, yeah.
But it's one of those things where it's a very, very interesting story because it's, we want to put it in the same bucket as perhaps MSU's difficulties or even Penn State's difficulties. It's not the same bucket. It's a terrible, terrible thing, but it's not decades of problems that we can actually see the paper trail of going to the administration and having these issues. So we're really talking about a guy in Urban Meyer who's one of the best at his job, but has, if not about a decade of, let's say,
questionable decision making,
interesting stories about him, and certainly interesting stories, especially at Florida, about the crime rate and the lives that a lot of his student athletes led after they left Urban Meyer's mentorship.
Yeah.
And whether or not that should fall on him or properly fall on him is part of the story. It's not part of the legal story, but it's certainly part of the court of public opinion story. So he comes out with a statement on Friday, and he has a lot of language in there that I analyzed, I looked at, that's not particularly lawyerly. That is, I'm a good person.
Yeah.
I have all these good women that love me. Look, all my best friends are women. How could I be in favor of domestic battery? And all these kinds of slightly shady statements that you do expect from a PR commentary to some extent, but maybe aren't the best tonally for convincing someone that you're completely above board.
Yeah.
Now, the nature of the story in and of itself of this thing happened in 2015. Oh, no, that never happened. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, yes, a week later. Actually, I handled all of that properly. I knew exactly what happened in 2015 is hard to believe in the way that he describes it. And so everybody looking at it says, it couldn't have gone down entirely that way.
Well, it's at what point, which story of 2015 are we supposed to believe, Urban? Supposed to believe the one that you just told us, or are we supposed to believe the one that you told us 2 weeks ago?
Well, the really interesting thing about that to me is that the story he told on Friday afternoon is one that's eminently falsifiable. There should be a written paper trail of him reporting to Gene Smith or anyone else in the athletic department. If that doesn't exist, there's no there. If it does exist, then what was Ohio State doing when they put him on paid administrative leave and didn't correct him from the Big Ten Media Days commentary? None of this makes sense right now. Not entirely.
No, and I think, that's the great point is there needs to be, yes, I thought it was very interesting and yet not surprising that he said he followed protocol but didn't give any details on what that was. He didn't say who he reported it to. Right. He essentially made a vague statement about, yes, I did what I was supposed to do, and that's that. The very first question that a reporter would ask him in a press conference would be, who did you tell?
Yeah, what happened? Tell us about that.
Yes, exactly. Instead, he's like, oh, I did the right thing here. Everybody look, I am above board. I did the right thing. I'm not going to tell you what any of that is.
Well, and the secondary part of this story is that it has us focusing on the lying or misspeaking, if you're giving the benefit of the doubt from last week. But that to some extent is taking away from the real crux of the issue, which was why he was being asked the question in the first place, which is he fires Smith, and then he gets asked his questions and says, oh, I would have fired him if I knew of anything in the intervening time between 2009 and now.
Right.
And then somebody comes out and says, well, you did. And then he said, no, I don't know anything. So the real issue is you kept on a guy that now you're saying you knew about from 2015 to 2018.
Right.
And the question is whether the media cycle or even the Ohio State University cycle is going to come back at that point, even if they agree. You reported it, but then your job was to do something more because right now the university looks terrible for essentially saying, your wide receiving coaching skills were more important than what we've got as an arrest and a police record from 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's another one of the big questions, and we talked about when we started the show, is essentially now Urban Meyer's admitted that some type of incident took place in 2015. So what was the incident? And if there was a major incident that rivals the 2009 Florida one, then yes, what are you doing employing this guy for the last 3 years? And as we, as I said a little bit earlier too, there's 9 supposedly phone calls to 911 and the whole thing. Chances are we're not talking about 2 isolated incidents in 2009 and 2015.
No, I think that's right. Although, one of the things I said about the statement on Friday was that I think I can now see what the defense strategy is and how they might pull it off depending on whether Ohio State wants to back him, which is I would strongly expect if Ohio State is on his side, and I think they very well might be, if only for his skill set, then I would expect them to come out and say, yes, he reported suspicions in 2015 because he had only suspicions himself. And then Gene Smith took those suspicions and talked to Coach Smith And those suspicions never went further than that because we didn't have anything concrete to act on, and the university can't act on non-concrete information. That's the next step I would see in this defense strategy, which is we all did what we were supposed to do, but we didn't have a smoking gun, and so that's what we were left with. And, of course, behind the scenes, we didn't want to upturn the apple cart and everything else that we can think of as cynical Michigan fans about the Ohio State University. But they might be able to craft that story, and that's what you're starting to see with.
Well, Rick, my only issue with that, and it's again in this way, it is similar to Penn State and it is similar to Michigan State, is we're going to do the bare minimum.
Yeah.
The absolute bare minimum that we're required to do legally or required to do by college, bylaws.
Protocols. Yeah, Title IX.
And as long as we do the bare minimum, then we are legally, I wouldn't say in the right, but we're not in the wrong. We can't be like, that's the whole John Engler argument for the last thing is what we did. We did the bare minimum. But at some point, it's a moral, ethical part of this too.
Absolutely.
And it's not like I found out that my buddy was beating up his wife.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I'm going to, do the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Or I could be a human being and do the right thing. And that's where this argument keeps on treading into the murkier waters where they just want to say, hey, we're okay legally. At some point it's like I don't give a damn if you're okay legally. And you're the right person.
But I think that's an important part of the story too, which is these institutions, all institutions, whether you're talking about a corporation or a university or whatever, can hold to the letter of their contract, can hold to the letter of their policies or protocols. And one of the things that we're seeing, especially in the Twitter age and the social media age, sometimes to over damaging effect, is that people can get out there and say, that's fine, you did everything by the book, but we hate you now. We're less likely to support your school. We're less likely to support your product or service. And Ohio State can feel that, just like all these other corporations can feel that to some extent right now. So by all means, you asked me to put my lawyer hat on. I'm telling you, I can see the lawyer's way out if they want to take it. And I think they deserve all the scorn and vitriol that will come at them for exactly what you say, which is you're essentially advocating that the institution can take an institutional blind eye towards something that is maybe not certain, but pretty obvious to the rest of us looking in on the thing from a third-party perspective. And we don't have to be okay with that. You can say, yeah, we followed it, we're going to do better next time, but we can hate you from now on for that reason. And I don't mean to put it in the same bucket as some of the other stuff we talked about. The other schools had much bigger issues with much longer frameworks and more people involved. It's still a bad look for the Ohio State University, and that's one of the things they'll be judging over the next 14 years of their quote-unquote independent investigative committee, 14 days, is what is the cost-benefit analysis of this? Urban Meyer is obviously worth a lot in wins and publicity and being on national TV, but what is the cost? And if we keep him on, what can we expect as blowback from the sports centers of the world, from not necessarily Ann Arbor Sports Talk Radio because they don't really care, but more national-facing analysis? And that's one of the things they'll be discussing.
Down in Cincinnati, John has a question for Rick. John, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So my question is, when it comes to reporting, is there a standard for how it needs to be reported? Meaning, could it just have been a discussion? Is there actually a dated paper trail that is required in terms of the reporting to prove that it happened when they said it happened? And I mean, if Gene Smith is willing to, would he fall on the sword and they would revisionist history say, oh, it was reported, we talked about it, or could they somehow make it look like it was documented back then? I'm just wondering, you said it's hard to falsify, but is it hard to revise and make up a new history?
Well, you'd have to ascribe certain bad acts to the Ohio State University administrators, which I think you're welcome to do. It's a matter of whether or not they'd be willing to do it. Mm-hmm. Somebody brought up a section in Urban Meyer's contract to me in response to the article that I did that does talk about writing being a protocol for reporting bad acts, either unlawful bad acts or just violations of university protocol by his staff and by his coaches. Whether or not that was followed, again, depends on exactly how the university can characterize what actually happened in 2015. And that might be the case where they say, yes, you have to actually report when you're going to make an allegation, But all Urban got was a comment from his wife, and he said, well, this is worth bringing up to Gene Smith. And so we had a conversation, and then Gene Smith talked to Coach Smith, and you might be able to craft a story like that at least follows the notion of the protocols that they have in place that would get them through a big fight here. But no, the I's dotted and T's crossed way of doing this would be a written report, if only because you, as the university, want that background yourself. You're trying to establish why you might fire someone. If he comes back and sues you for being fired, you want to be able to point to a file folder and say, here is the reason we fired you. Here's all the bad things you did. Here's the discussions we had. And so every university, while they can differ on kind of the details, generally has a protocol where you're keeping very close track of human resources decisions.
Great phone call. Appreciate it, John. And actually, that's something I wondered, too, if you could make up the paper trail. But if you did.
Well, you can do anything you want,
yeah.
But it's always a question of, if somebody comes back at you.
Well, and all you need is one person. All you need is one person along the trail that says, whoa, what? We're gonna make this stuff up. We're gonna go back and like time stamp things like that. Are you out of your mind? And they all they have to do is tell one member of the media, and it's
you'd have a whistleblowing issue. And that's one of the things I said in that blog post was Urban Meyer says a number of things which are falsifiable, such as I've always done everything right at the University of Florida and the Ohio State University. And it's one of those things where, okay, now there's blood in the water. There are definitely reporters at least looking into all of his past acts for the last little while because there is some publicity. There's some clicks to be gained from proving some of this stuff wrong. So some of the things that he says in his statement, while it is clearly vetted by legal counsel, don't strike me as things that legal counsel would have liked to have in there. So they clearly had a client that knew what they wanted to say and, quote unquote, knew they were right and were dealing with that at the same time that they were trying to massage the issue.
All right, when we come back, we'll move on from talking about Urban Meyer and just talk a little more Michigan football in our final 15 minutes. Rick, can you stick around for a few?
Sure, happy to.
All right, this is Inside the Huddle on Sports Talk 1050, WTKA, the ticket. Hey, welcome back to Inside the Huddle. We were talking a little Urban Meyer from the legal side of it to Rick Hoeg of Hoeg Law. You can reach out to Rick at hoeglaw.com, 734-263-1001. If you are especially a small business owner, but if you're in any need of legal advice, legal help, Rick.
Sure, like if you're negotiating a new contract of any kind. I mean, I'm happy to help with those kinds of things, Michael.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't received it yet, but I was going to forward it on to you.
Oh, so, sure.
So I figure between you and Jamie having two lawyers on retainer now, that I'm big time. So figured one of you could look at it, the other one could look at it. Maybe one sees one thing, one sees the other thing.
Yes, you will find if you get two lawyers to look at a contract that you will have disparate opinions on the contract. It's like two doctors, really, with diagnoses, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, I can't wait. So, no, I should have that this week. Can you take a look at it? Take a look at, hey, look at, if you need contracts looked at, you need set up a new LLC.
Sure.
Work with, one of the things that Rick does really well is he helps small businesses become bigger by helping them, dot all those I's, cross all those T's, but also offering just that advice. Has been working with small businesses for, close to a decade now?
More than a decade. Yeah, this is my 13th year out of school.
Okay, because it was 2005, right?
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It is a long time. And thank you for saying that. It feels like a long time sometimes. It also feels like yesterday some other days.
Are you coming up on a high school reunion pretty soon then? Because I got a 20-year this year. Yeah,
I must be. I graduated in 98. So that's the one I'm skipping, I guess.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about skipping mine. It's the week that Michigan plays Northwestern.
Oh, okay. Okay. I went to Detroit Catholic Central. They have a pretty good mailing list. I don't know that I've gotten anything on an anniversary yet. So
maybe they want to forget about you.
Yeah, it's possible. Now that I'm on these kinds of shows.
There you go. Rick, do you know what you and the family are going to be doing for the Michigan-Notre Dame game already?
I think that I am in charge of the kiddos that weekend because I think my wife is out of town, but I'll have to check with her on that. But no, we're going to stay in. We're going to celebrate the start of college football. My wife, as I may have mentioned, I don't know if that I have, is a big USC Trojans fan.
Oh, yeah.
So
who do they have opening weekend?
Some nobody, I think. They have some pretty good September games. They're playing Stanford early. They're playing Texas, which used to be a big game. I don't know whether Texas will do anything this year or not.
Yeah.
But so we are a quasi Pac-12 type family. So as long as they aren't directly attacking the Michigan Wolverines, I do tend to root for my wife's interest with USC, and certainly they've had a lot more recent success than we have.
Got to watch out for the powerhouse known as UNLV.
There you go.
Do I have, since this is now my first football season as a married man,
Okay.
what you just said, that you live in this household where you root for her team.
Sure.
My wife's team is Michigan State.
Okay. All right.
So what is my play here? Do I essentially say, screw them, like I have been for the last 38 years of my life?
Uh-huh.
Do I say, all right, if my wife watches the game when Michigan State plays, I won't openly root against them? Do I actually root for them? Like what? And just never root for them against Michigan? Yeah, what is my play here? I've never been married before, and I like to sleep in the same bed as my wife. I don't like to sleep on the couch, which I've only had to do once so far in 7 months of marriage. So I'm just wondering.
Better rate than me. It's good. It's good. But I've been married for 10 years or 11 years. Sorry, honey. So no, it's my recommendation on this, and I think she's listening. So this is all taken with a grain of salt because I'm under radio watch.
Because your wife's listening.
I'm pretty sure.
My wife is not.
No, I'm pretty sure she's listening. We'll see. We'll see when I get home. Is essentially lighthearted, content ambivalence. Something along the lines of, I don't mind if they win, not abject hatred that you might have been experiencing before. Obviously, except in the rivalry game, you're allowed to hate as much as you want. But yeah, it's one of those things. Michigan State's an interesting one because they never had the level for me of Notre Dame and Ohio State of kind of that abject hatred, really until kind of D'Antonio decided that it was going to be his livelihood to hate Michigan and to be that way about it. So it's one of those things where I think you got to figure out your own way through, but mostly I'd kind of try to remain neutral more than anything else. You don't have to outright root for them. They are Michigan State.
Well, I won't ever outright root for them. Yeah, that's a no-go. That's I don't think I would be able to show up and do this show if I openly rooted for Michigan State. But I have for, especially with the D'Antonio era, I would agree with you. Yeah. I've openly rooted against Michigan State for the last decade or so. Like, I want to see them crash and burn. I want to see that place just get sucked into a black hole
because they've invited it. Absolutely.
And I'm so tired of the trash talk. I'm so tired of listening to guys like Mike Valeni who just
in general.
Watch your profanity.
Thank you, Miz. So I think we've all agreed that you had these rivalries with Notre Dame and Ohio State, and you always wanted to beat Ohio State, and you were beating Michigan State all the time, so you didn't really worry about it.
Right.
But now, the hate for Michigan State is so strong that, yes, when they went 3-9, that was awesome.
It was a good year.
Awesome. Michigan went 10-3. They were 9-0 at one point. Michigan State is floundering to 3-9. I'm thinking this is as good as it can be as a Michigan fan. We're number 2. They're 3-9. This is terrific. But I don't know that I need to openly root for that anymore if I don't want to sleep. I mean, as long as I want, especially if I want to sleep in the same bed with my wife.
Well, you can have rivalry hatred in your heart. You just have to work on acting a little bit. No, I think the most trouble I ever got into with respect to sports and my wife was, and I can't remember the exact scenario, but it was the year where Urban and Florida jumped us to get into the BCS title game. Mm-hmm. And it was the last game of the year, and USC-UCLA were playing, and they were in front of us. And USC dropped the game to, I can't remember what it was, a 4-8 UCLA team. And I was watching supposedly neutrally, and I knew the status because I thought Michigan was going to get into the title game if USC lost. And I leapt up and cheered because it was a final play type win, and Yeah, I got a dirty look and anger for a good period of time. And I was like, you don't understand. Michigan's going to the title game now, which of course they didn't. But it's one of those things where you got to play it close to the vest. And if that kind of scenario develops, that'll still happen. Well,
and I tell you what, and I think that's the good advice, because last year, the only time I've gotten in trouble in 2.5 years being with Amy was last year when they lost to Syracuse in the NCAA tournament, and I was openly gleeful about it. And
springing your step, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to, I didn't have to, like, during the game, I wasn't like, yeah, come on, Orange, or like, with the whole thing. I wasn't getting into it. And if they would have won the game, it would have been fine. It wouldn't have, like, mattered to me that much. But when they lost the game, I was actually watching the game at my father-in-law's house, and he's a big Spartan, and he was just kind of ticked off in the whole thing, and I was, like, kind of, like, trying to fight the smile.
Yep.
And he wasn't mad about it that I was smiling, but Amy was sitting there and she's like, we lost, this stinks, and this is so stupid. She's like, this is a bad day. And my father-in-law said, well, not everybody's unhappy about the loss. And she's like, well, who's not unhappy about it? And she's like, your husband. He's smiling from grinning from ear to ear.
Wow.
And Amy looks at me and she's like, are you excited about the fact that Michigan State lost? And I'm like, no. And she's like, are you happy about it? I'm like, no. And she's like, you wanted Michigan State to win, right? I'm like, no.
Oh, see, there you go. No.
And she's like, what do you mean you didn't want them to win? I'm like, Amy, I didn't care. Like,
yeah,
I don't need to see them win. I don't need to see them lose.
Yeah.
It was fine.
You're ambivalent. You don't care when they choke.
I'm like, because I'm just, and she's like, you're happy. And I'm like, I'm not. And she's like, well, be happy from the couch tonight.
Yeah, well, that kind of thing can happen. Your father-in-law threw you under the bus a little bit there, though. I mean, there should be some solidarity, I think.
Yeah, I don't think he did with any type of, like, malicious, like he was trying to get me in trouble. He was just kind of making a comment, but that comment didn't do me any favors.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah. Well, as a guy that grew up in Michigan, obviously I have a lot of Michigan State friends, a lot of Michigan State clients, a lot of Michigan State family. And so it's that particular battle, even more than Ohio State and Notre Dame, is kind of a constant one where, I actually wish the rivalry had a little bit less personal animus in it.
Oh, I agree.
It was seemingly more fun to me when I was a kid, where it's, it was little brother insofar as we still kind of wanted you to succeed as long as you succeeded a little less than us. And now it's not. No, as you say, burn it down.
This is to me, the rivalry now is like, I don't know if you ever had this issue when you're a kid, but like being on the school ground and someone wronging you, and you get like into it with them, and like you like really like dropping some punches and like shoving and back and forth, and it's
mean.
It is. It's mean and nasty rivalry now, where you really can't. I mean, trying to navigate my wife here, but you really can't you don't even want to talk to Michigan State friends the entire football season.
Yeah, certainly not that week, and certainly not any week where something bad has happened to Michigan.
Right.
Even more so than something good happening to Michigan State. We talk about little brother. It's true, even if they've had this massive success over the last decade, because there's still this major ability to judge their own success on our failures. And so Michigan having any kind of bad situation is just a terrible week to talk to your Michigan State clients or friends or family or anything else. So that's the level of discourse right now, and it's troubling, because I would much rather have friends in my Michigan family.
I would be able to enjoy the rivalry with friends and family and just kind of And with them I can, with my in-laws I can, but nobody else. I can't talk to Michigan State people the week of the game. I can't even talk to them the month of the game.
Yeah, no, and certainly not like we should have won last year, and then after that game was just a terrible, terrible week. So it's something we all have to deal with. But, if your wife isn't listening to the show, you can always come on here with me, and we can be gleeful about Michigan State's latest loss or choke job in the tournament or Izzo-ing or whatever you want to describe it as, and we can do that together. I'm here.
Izzo-ing, I like it.
Well, Izzo used to be a compliment, and in the last little while, they've really underperformed what I think their talent level should be.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, I don't know. It's been, 4 years since they were
great classes, great talent, NBA level players.
Oh, yeah.
And, John Boehlein's essentially the opposite of Tom Izzo right now, and that's okay by me.
Hoeglaw.com, HOEGLAW.com to reach out to Rick. Appreciate you kind of hanging out with us for this last hour or so, talking Urban Meyer, talking a little, I didn't, that wasn't my intention to talk about Michigan State, but God, I just hate them so much.
Well, we can talk football more next time, but we're certainly closing in on the football season, so that's pretty darn exciting.
Can't wait.